At the end of your life, what will be your legacy? What will you leave behind for future generations? For the world, join the World Messenger, Izabela Lundberg, each week as she brings you a new distinguished guest from the business, sports, or entertainment world to share their success, their struggles, and their lessons. They will share their insights into current hot topics that affect everyone. Izabela facilitates an intimate, vulnerable environment to find the true value of humanity and real leadership. Are you ready for your legacy? The legacy that matters?
Hello, my beautiful friends. It's Izabela Lundberg here, the World Messenger, and I'm inviting you for another epic episode of Legacy Leader Show. Guess what? You guys are for a treat. I have someone that absolutely has so much accomplishments in wide range of industry and professions. Yeah, you heard me right. And is always able to land well, pivot, and create tremendous success. From ranging working with Fortune 500 companies and also very strong entrepreneurial background, but also background in legal, mental health, you range social services, I mean, you name it, and the large Fortune 500 companies, but definitely always played heavily in technology space. And without further ado, I will let him share all of the things I actually miss purposely. Let me introduce you for Jeffrey Herzfeld. Jeffrey, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on your podcast, Izabela.
Absolutely. It's absolutely great to have you here on Legacy Leader Show, because what we're always looking is for leaders that can tell us not only what's currently going on, but also what was the pivotal moments in their career and their trajectory and their growth. Because both of us know, Jeffrey, that a lot of leaders are having a lot of challenges, doesn't matter how seasoned they are, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of our conversations for some time now has been about what a good company looks like versus one that's challenged constantly and not being able to move the dial very much.
Correct. And before we dive into that, Jeff, okay, so you and I know each other for at least decade and a half. And through that time alone was tremendous transformation in both of our careers and personal lives. But prior to that, you had so many wide range of experiences. Just walk us through some of the really contrasting roles that you had and how you were able always to effectively pivot, because a lot of people, I'm sure, are struggling right now with that.
Sure, I'll do my best to make this concise, which means we'll be finished in about 24 hours. So having said so having said that, I'd like to first state that as we go through and walk through kind of, the places I've been and how I got there, most of it was not intentional. So while I always counsel people to live their life with positive intent and have a life plan and a direction, we have to be prepared for the unknown, which is amazing. It goes without saying that, this is a paradox of the highest order, because we're saying that we're going to plan our lives out, and yet we have to plan for the unknown, which is, virtually an oxymoron. And so, one of my favorite expressions is an old Yiddish expression. Although I'm not Jewish, I love the expression. It's man plans, God laughs.
True, very, very true.
And there's irony on multiple levels there. So that really does describe a lot of what I went through. So I've gone through 2 recession layoffs in my career, hopefully not a third coming up. I have fired the founder and president of a company and that individual hired me, and then I had to downsize my own position. And, I just recently gone through a COVID-related termination. So, these things are typically not things that you can plan for. But to your point, and at the beginning of the conversation, it's like, how do you respond to adversity or changes in your plan or changes in your life? So, we can talk a little bit about that, but certainly, you among other people, more than most people, understand what that looks like, and probably more so than I do. So I started out my career, and I like to say that I've had a lot of life adventures, and my career is one of those adventures. But those adventures, sometimes they're common, adventures that a lot of people go through. So you go through, college or grad school or some of that. Those are adventures in and of themselves. Lots of experience and learning, changes in career, a marriage, a divorce, children, recessions, that sort of thing. And then some more, less common. And we may or may not get to some of those, but for me, that involves forays into Panama, Morocco, and Argentina, and Mexico, and some other places.
That's fantastic. Seems like so far an extremely life well lived. But what is interesting thing is, you played quite a bit in legal field originally, and do you mind to share a little bit how do you stumble upon that career path, and what you dealt with, and one of the most crazy experiences that you actually have that I just learned recently?
Well, I'm not sure which one that is, but there's so many to choose from. I had been gravitating probably since grade school into the legal profession. I think, and I went to a parochial school growing up, and so I had nuns. And I remember, I think I was in 6th grade or something along that nature, and this teacher that I had told me that I was going to grow up and be a lawyer. And I said, well, how do you know that? And she said, you talk a lot. So apparently that was, somewhat set in stone from an early age. But ultimately, I went to college, gravitated towards political science, ended up doing internships at the state capitol in Denver, Colorado, as well as doing an internship in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C. And subsequent to that, ended up going to law school. And most of the opportunities that I had to work in the legal space were in the criminal justice arena. So I ended up determining that I was going to, put on my white hat and, go fight crime. So that's what I did for a while. Strangest stories, boy, I'm not sure I can tell any of those on video, because most of them were rather gruesome, because most of what I dealt with was violent crime.
And you dealt with some of the most violent crimes here in the state of Colorado, and as an attorney general, right?
District attorney for one of the judicial districts of the state of Colorado. And each state, divides their various jurisdictions differently. Colorado, for its district attorney, separates those into judicial districts. So I was basically in the northern part of the Denver metro area, which, job security was high in that area. Let's put it that way, because crime never rested. So,
it's unfortunate that we have to joke around, but I also find the truth that even in the current times, we're seeing such an increase of crime. But you also being involved in Gladiator School. Do you mind, for everybody watching and listening, tell us a little bit about that experience? That's the experience I was referencing, because that really paints the picture of what you have to endure early on, and how then now you pivoted in so many different directions, which we'll get in a second too.
Well, just to be clear, I think I know what you're referencing to. It was the time that I occasionally joke and say, to tell people just to see what the reaction is, that I spent time in prison. And while that's true, context is important.
Yes, it is. Both of us spent time in prison, but not as locked individuals, as criminals, which is which is fortunate, but it's also fortunate that it was such a tremendous need to be involved in that capacity.
So I actually ended up having to go to what you have and I labeled, and that's why you get the name Gladiator School, one of the most notorious prisons in the state of Colorado, which was home to, and then you have to use parentheses when you talk about Gladiator School. It wasn't actually a school. It was basically, though, where hardened violent criminals would go. And, the term Gladiator School was because they basically had to survive among other violent criminals. And that always made it somewhat, incombustible type of experience. But I ended up going into that prison in order to interview one of the inmates at the time relative to some allegations he had made about police corruption in the Denver metro area. So that was an interesting experience, and another adventure along. Most people have not spent any time, much less significant time, within the walls of a prison, and I'm here to tell you that most people wouldn't enjoy it. so that's my public service comment for the day is: don't do crime, don't go to prison.
A great advice, specifically as many people are trying to have shortcuts to things that they wanted to get to. Those shortcuts definitely are not worth it, taking the risk and getting on the opposite side of the law, right? So with that in mind, obviously, you put so much great work, and not only to keep Colorado safe and obviously support some initiatives on national level, but what you did is you also helped with something on international level with humanitarian efforts from disaster and reliefs and supports and whatnot. So which also brings your humanitarian side, because you've seen bad ugly, right? And then also, to my understanding, you did some efforts in Haiti and some fundraising, and continue to really support and understand the landscape and ever so changing politically, economically for a lot of people.
Yeah, there was we haven't really talked about a timeline or how I moved from the district attorney's office elsewhere, but in that timeline I did some consulting and was involved in an angel investment partnership. And as part of that partnership, my partner had significant contacts both in the IT world and in the entertainment world. And we connected with a well-known personality singer. And that particular individual had a strong interest in helping. At that time, Haiti had gone through another one of its hurricanes. And unfortunately, that's something they get semi-regularly or more often than not than some other locations. And so we were putting together a proposal to do a fundraiser, which involved, a number of singers who this particular personality knew in the industry and who were going to volunteer their time. And these things have been done in the past. I'm reasonably certain that people have heard of I think Bruce Springsteen was involved in one or more of those several years ago. And so that was the idea. Unfortunately, we had not gotten as far. We didn't get as far as we wanted to in that, but we did, participate in trying to connect some of the folks on the ground in Haiti with, we looked at, water, potable water. We looked at tents. We looked at a number of things, and we're able to provide, information and contacts to assist those people. Relative to other international forays, those tended to be more business oriented, and most of the other, I'm going to say, volunteer work was mostly in this country.
And it's so interesting, like when I look at and listen, it's like how it's important that all of us can make a difference if we put our skills to the good use, right? So with that in mind, Jeff, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about, so when you decided to transition from obviously legal side of the work and then into consulting, you did something really interesting afterwards. What did you get yourself into?
Well, that's an open-ended question, and there's many avenues we could go down. But I'll just say that, one of the reasons, or probably the primary reason I left the district attorney's office was I had been primarily involved in crime cases, and it became apparent over time that I was seeing people at their worst. So I would deal with victims of crime, rape victims. I would deal with the families of murder victims. And clearly, I had to deal with on another entirely different level with the people who perpetrated these crimes. In addition to that, this is still in my 20s, I was supervising homicide scenes and attending autopsies. And so the bulk of the work is primarily focused on the negative side of life. Now, granted, I always believed that what I was doing was helping people, ultimately helping people by taking these bad actors off the street so that they wouldn't harm anyone else. But it became wearing, and I'd gotten to the point where I became pretty jaundiced about people in general, and perhaps life at that point, because most of the people who I was working with had very little concern for people's lives other than their own. So having said that, I made a decision, and one of the few points in my career where I actually made a conscious decision and followed through on it to leave that. And ultimately, my intent at the time was to do transactional work or put deals together. Two people who wanted to be in the room as opposed to the ones that one of them was forced to be in a room. So ended up moving into commercial real estate, which is a big transition, but not so much if you think about it in terms of negotiating deals, putting documents together, and ultimately consummating transactions. Unfortunately, my timing wasn't particularly great there, and I'll say that timing is important in all life decisions. And sometimes we know what that looks like, and sometimes all we can do is make the best estimate based upon information available at the time, our life experiences, and perhaps even just our intuition. Sometimes that works well, sometimes there's another plan that becomes more apparent over time.
Yes, and that's so true, because unless you try it, you don't know it, right? And then all of that has been a lot of, as they say, trial and error and preparation for something greater. And ultimately, when you find yourself and landing in IT space, and also as we talked earlier, like you're fluent in 5 languages. So do you mind disclosing to others what that means and where the fluency came in because of allowing yourself to be so diverse? So do you mind sharing that language scope so others really can understand how important it is? Like, you have a legal side of the world, right, in the business. Then you have a general business and conversations around regulations and policies, depending which industry also. Then you're so versed in IT arena. So please extend.
All right. So as and it varies from time to time when I think about this, but as I see it, I probably worked in 5 different industries with at least 10 different functionalities to identify some of those industries. So we talked about criminal law, commercial real estate. I've been involved in building an early stage franchise company and taking that international. Environmental remediation management, I helped build a fee-based consulting company within the engineering space. IT business operations, supply chain, etc. So all of these came about through essentially opportunities and challenges, which are essentially just flip side of the same coin, that have occurred in my career. And I mentioned earlier that some of this was intended, some of this was my making decisions at a particular point in time. And it's funny, we talk about being fluent in multiple languages, because I know you are, I believe, in 6. My languages are a little different than yours. Mine relate to industry, so I can speak tech. Some people might call it geek. I can speak legalese. I can speak idiomatic English. I can speak supply chain, and I can speak management. so we could probably go on and more. But I kid a little bit about that. Joke about that, because it's critically important for business leaders to be able to have a broad-based background in order to effectuate positive change within their organization. And whether it was initially my intent to be so broadly scoped or not, that's where the skill sets have ultimately come to lay. And so we tend to hopefully, people get involved in organizations and businesses that will be in areas that they enjoy and with people that they enjoy, but that's, as not always the case. So you develop that experience, hopefully some good comes out of the bad. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
That's great, because one of the things that I'm seeing also obviously is, and right now for everybody watching and listening, people are going through jumping from different industries. They're not sure how their skill sets are being transferable, let alone from different degrees and different backgrounds, right? It's like, how do you transfer into the law? And then also in typical, much more consultative driven business arena, or where you also play huge pivotal role in operations of the company and changing the culture, or very global scope of the teams and leaders with different types of problems or issues, and how all these skill sets build. And a lot of times we're not clear, because path is not always linear. We know that, but the skill and knowledge that we accumulate over time makes tremendous difference. So with that in mind, obviously you did some really huge international also efforts. I believe some interesting things you did in Panama and other parts of the world. Do you mind sharing some really most satisfying projects you've been involved, and what was the instrumental, no matter which role you've been in or company, since you've targeted a lot of Fortune 500, built programs that never existed, secured financially stability of those programs and exponential growth, and then also used a great talent pool to elevate him and let him run and do what they're good at it. What would you say was the crucial thing for you to be successful as a leader in any of those roles?
That's an excellent question. One I pondered for multiple years, probably for most of my career. I was thinking about that earlier today even, and I thought, the kind of the parable I thought about was back in school, my school years. Who are the most effective teachers? And at its core, some of leadership is that teaching component and leading component. And I thought, sometimes you have to go through, challenges in order to grow. I would say most times you need to go through this challenge in order to grow. And some of the best teachers that I had at various points in my educational career were those that had been in the workforce and done different things. And so they brought a greater depth of understanding, I think, into the human condition, as in terms of motivation, in terms of ability to break through, if you will, and have some meaningful dialogue or impact upon people's lives. And I try to bring that as a result of all these crazy things that I've done, and I can address a couple of those specifically, but I wanted to first, answer what I view as the main thrust of your question, which is how do you develop leadership skills, and how do you know, how do you apply those? And given the vast numbers of personalities and industries and all that, I still think that there are certain tenets that ring true no matter where you're at, whether that's cultural, or whether that's industry, or whether that's function. People generally, I've found over my career, want to be appreciated. They want to feel like they're being productive and have some impact upon the organization. I think that if you look at the things that drive people to jobs, number one, I think perhaps is compensation, which is perhaps no surprise. But I think number two, and subsequently, you get into much more interesting issues. And so, or not issues, but factors. And some of those factors, and we've addressed those, or I've addressed those briefly. Some of those is what I do within the organization making an impact on the organization? Am I doing productive work, or am I just marching in place? How am I being treated by management? Am I being provided opportunities to grow within the organization, my skills and my ability to again affect the organization? So I think all of these are critical, and many leaders, unfortunately, are people who have the title CEO or a leadership position, quite honestly, seem to be driven by other motivations rather than raising their company or raising their people within the organization. I try to focus on both.
That's fantastic. So for everybody watching and listening, again, Jeffrey just shared his success. It's not when we were so preoccupied, specifically in America, on the bottom line, we neglect people, and people are the ones and teams that will propel company forward. And if we don't focus on that side as well, the scales get offset. And that's why we've seen some really unusual trends. So with all the wealth of information and knowledge and experience you've been through, what are you really seeing going on in current time, and what is maybe shocker to you, or why you, or maybe something that you were just like, oh my God, no brainer, because I'm seeing this and it's kind of cyclical. Would love to kind of compare and contrast a little bit. Do you mind sharing some of your insight there?
Well, I will try to avoid the political side of that conversation, but I will just say that it become, if you think about the impact COVID has had,
Yes.
it's not simply about the physical health, but we've seen tremendous effect upon the mental health of workers throughout the world, quite honestly, not just the United States. And the ones who have suffered the most are where the lockdowns have been most severe. So what we're seeing is that people are, in fact, social creatures, and they a lot of people, and particularly children, are affected by that inability to socialize. What we're also seeing is something which is accelerated. I think it's began before COVID, but has accelerated because of COVID, which is this work from home concept. And so now this hybrid work model seems to be moving towards a more standard approach, at least on the services side. I mean, clearly, if you're in a manufacturing industry or an assembly line type of industry, that's not going to work. But for many, many people, part of their jobs can be done from home, and that's created, I think, still an ongoing conflict, or let's just say an ongoing tug of war, where some companies are looking for people to come back and full time. Some understand that maybe that's a hybrid, and there are other there are employees that just have made a determination in their own mind that they will only work from home and not go into an office, which that impacts, if you think about it, that impacts not only the employer-employee relationship, but it affects commercial real estate, how much you need as an organization. It affects your planning and your budget. I mean, so it has a massive impact upon the world, and there is we've seen a certain level of dissatisfaction. I think has raised its head, so that it becomes more apparent because of COVID as well. So certain trends that were, I think, already in place have been accelerated, and I think that's probably the biggest change I've seen.
Thank you for sharing that, your perspective, obviously, because you worked also for many Fortune 500 companies, and some of them actually Fortune 100. But what's interesting is you also brought up really great points earlier, how when certain leaders that have a title and have a position, yet they miss huge opportunities. And something that also gives you, do you have authority, or do you have it's like we have also this dance between who is authorized to make a decision, who is the accountable for that or not, or should be, right? And how that dance really is affecting not only changes that are needed, but also really excellent talent that is capable, able to do the work, but they don't have that opportunity or authority to do so. Yet they're put in those positions where they deal with them on ongoing daily basis, and how that can really reversely affect not only performance, morale, but people desiring to stay. So do you mind sharing, how do you see that perspective?
Thank you, and you're speaking to my heart there, because that's a long-term issue that I've had to deal with personally and professionally as well. One example, probably one of the most productive and enjoyable positions I've held. I worked for, and I don't think there's any problem saying the name. So I worked for a division of General Motors at one point.
Yes.
But more on the finance side, be more specific on the mortgage side, mortgage lending side. And I had worked, I did 2 iterations with GMAC, one in and had gravitated towards what they called the builder program. So my customers and clients were the largest national home builders and resort developers, and GMAC killed that program after a couple of years while I was there. And so I wandered around. I used to say I wanted the desert, but people, took offense at that. so I wandered a bit and found my way ultimately to Wells Fargo and built a business organization for them from scratch that was successful. And now it compressed 4 years. And then GMAC came back to me and said, we've reinstituted a version of this program and would like you to run a region for us. And we went back and forth for probably 6 months because I didn't want to have that rug pulled out from underneath me again. And I got there after I agreed to go, take on a 9-state region for them, and found that while there was product we could offer into the marketplace, there was very little operational infrastructure. And so for many people, that would have been, a hard no, a hard stop. It's like, you promised me this new program that had been in place for 9 months. I have certain, expectations, and those expectations haven't been met because, there's no business plan, there's no marketing plan, there's no marketing content, there's no sales targets in the sales organizations, there's no selection criteria for people who are coming in, there's no training, etc. I loved it, quite honestly. And it enabled me to employ a multitude of skill sets. And I was provided with the authority. So to analogize here a little bit, there's people talk about, being in a tight noose, or at Wells Fargo, when I got there, the noose was sort of around my neck and kind of ultimately landed on my shoulders, which was a good thing, because it enabled me greater, flexibility and liberty to do things that I needed to do. At GMAC, that noose went away pretty much after the first year. And so I helped build that operational infrastructure. I helped train people. I closed business deals. I wrote the business plan, et cetera. So one of the things that has been very noteworthy both before and subsequent to that experience is looking at the relationship between your expectations and your job requirements. That is to say, what you have responsibility for versus how much authority you're provided at the front end. And if those aren't in balance, it's been my experience that the culture in the organization is not going to be a healthy one. So if those who have the titles, the highest titles within the organization, take the least amount of responsibility, and those who have the most responsibility are the ones who are doing the work in the field, but they're not provided with the authority to make those changes, you're not going to have a healthy culture. So, that's one of the learnings I would take away, and one that I've kind of been beating the drum on for quite some time now, as you know.
And it's unfortunate, and I'm glad you shared that, because we've seen the pattern and we've seen what it needs to be done. As you pointed out, years of experience, different company, different stages of their evolution or transformation or change. And then in the same time, we're running in situations where we're seeing that, again, it's not the lack of knowledge, it's not lack of a competent talent, but yet it's very different results because unable for them to do that. And with that in mind, what would you recommend for all the leaders that are listening, either our smaller, fast-growing enterprises to Fortune 500? Where do you see some huge opportunities for them? Because obviously, with wealth of knowledge and experience that you have, you're seeing also in current landscape some of these patterns that keep coming over and over again.
I think that it's easy to fall into patterns of behavior, just as human beings. And I think that people who have been in leadership positions for a long time are not immune to that. That being said, I think all of us, humans, every human probably needs some time for introspection in terms of where we are and what we want to achieve. And if in fact, as one of my more dogged books written by Jim Collins, my business books, Good to Great, and some of the other books that Jim has written, it's this concept of sublimating your ego to the good of the organization and to the good of the people within the organization. And quite honestly, I think they're inextricably intertwined. In other words, if you don't hire the best people, if you don't support your people, if you don't give them opportunities to grow within your organization, why are you there? From a management, I see just terrible management at probably the majority of companies for whom I've consulted or worked myself. And I would say that the majority of companies don't get it right, and that there's an amazing opportunity for organizations and for leaders of organizations who want to do right by their company and by their people to kind of reinvent themselves. And COVID provides a little bit of a push again towards that goal. But at the end of the day, we have to remember, why do we have management in companies to begin with? There's certainly there needs to be leadership within any organization. But the reason that you have management in the first place is ultimately to extend the ability to impact positively your organization and those people. And so if you're seeing people within your organization whose sole goal is to beat their people down, you've got the wrong person in there, and you need to do something about it. And, changing culture comes from the top, no matter what size of the organization. People, and I've been in middle level management, I've been in upper level management, I've been at lower levels, at various points in my career. And the reality is that, if you have bad management, it affects all the people within the organization. It affects your organizational goals. So why would you, if you're aware of that, and maybe that's some of the problem, let's become more aware. But if you're aware of that, you need to do something about it. And that change is going to come from you, and it has to come from you. If you're the CEO or the CIO or the CTO or the CFO or something, at the leadership level, you need to make a difference.
That is excellent point. And again, owning it, being accountable, taking responsibility, but also removing obstacles so that others can shine and actually do what they're here for, right? And accomplish exactly why they're in organization in the first place. With that in mind, I wanted to ask you, obviously you are already had such a tremendous established successes and accomplished so much. What's next in the bucket list? What are you striving to accomplish next? What will be something that Jeff is aiming to make magic happen? Either it's this year or just in general.
I've always tried to be empathetic, because I view my desire to make a difference as being what most people probably want in their lives relative to their jobs. But the other part of that, as I've now reached my late 30s. Go ahead, laugh. Late 30s, and many times I've celebrated my 39th birthday, by the way, multiple times. So
I can't agree more. Me too.
as I reach that, I think about, to your point, you think about legacy. Okay, so what do you want to do? How do you want to be perceived? How do you want to leave at the end of the day? And we've all heard that, when it's time for you to leave the mortal coil, as Shakespeare says, then what are people going to say about you, and what does your life mean? And that's the legacy, that I think we've talked about in the past, and a lot of people think about it. I guess a couple of things. I'll just say, reiterate a couple of points and then get to specifically what do I want to do. But I have found over my career a couple of really simple, truths. One is small acts of kindness travel far, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
that's beautiful.
When the room is dark, go towards the brightest spot that you can find, and ultimately be that light yourself. And so as I go into whatever the next chapter is here, I'm excited to hopefully bring some of that philosophy, but also, some of the learning and the experiences that I've gotten, so people don't have to get caught up in that. Although having said that, I have two kids, as you know, and I remember thinking as a new dad some years ago that I was going to help my kids avoid all the pitfalls that I could, and the ones that I had gotten sucked into, and that doesn't really work. I'm here to tell you, your kids kind of got to go through their own path and their own
Yes.
learning, and I think it's true that in terms of companies and people as well. But for me personally, I want to be engaged at a high level with perhaps helping companies and leadership within those companies, achieve their goals, and perhaps sometimes having an objective outsider look at those, what's working and what's not working with the organization. From my consulting days, I will tell you that we would take surveys when we'd walk in of the existing employees, for a number of different items, and almost inevitably the leadership, we would survey them too with the same questions, and the leadership and the people who are what we call the mainline workers would be significantly apart in terms of how they viewed the organization. And so I think some of what I'd like to do is try to help companies build, grow, improve their organizations. I mean, honestly, if there's one thing I can tie together in the various functionalities and the various industries I've worked in, is over a period of time, I have really focused on building, growing, and improving, operations, working and strengthening strategic alliances and governing those alliances or managing those alliances, and mitigating risk, which again, all of those take on multiple flavors at multiple times. But I think those are sort of the big bucket, if you will, to throw. If you're going to throw my career into buckets, those are probably the three that I would think probably make the most sense.
Mm. That is great, because again, everybody watching and listening, treat life as an experience, as a playing ground, as acquiring a lot of skills. Like, look at how Jeff pivot, how he shifted, how he changed, and as a result, created tremendous impact in so many industries and many companies. And he's consistently pivoting right now. So for everybody that are really going through this anxiety and stressors, and because we really live in time of ambiguity and tremendous uncertainty, right? So I would like to, if you don't mind, just say, what would be a piece of advice? How did you, on an individual, as a man who is also a breadwinner, provider, who has this extra pressure to deliver all the time, right? Not only in arena in a work, but in personal life, and how the success is being crafted. What would you say? What would be one of your advices for them, or recommendations in terms of to handle and navigate current complexities, ambiguities, and unknowns as an anchor as they go through all these roller coaster rides?
It's a great question. Again, you asked really good questions, but I have a couple of responses, and they're not necessarily exactly the same path. But I would say number one is, you need to understand that the world is never going to be 100% perfect according to whatever your plan looks like or your world looks like. There are going to be, life tends to look more like a roller coaster than a rocket ship ride from beginning to end, straight up. It tends to be, I describe it as more like a ball of string that's being played with by a cat. so make sure, my advice, let's say, to a younger person would be, make sure you have some reserves. Make sure you understand that today may not be the same as tomorrow, which could be good or it could be bad. So a certain amount of resiliency is required. I think I shared this with you just last night, that when we were talking at some business, that my daughter, after going through boot camp, and who, after her high school years, we kind of beat heads a little bit, as pretty much any teenager will with their parent. And we had breakfast one day, and she said, "Dad, you know what we are?" And it scared me because I didn't know what she was going to say. I thought it was something awful, and she was going to tell me I'm a horrible father or something. She said, "You know what we are, Dad? We're resilient." Yeah, we had gone through some of this that we've talked about. We've gone through recessions, some challenging times with regard to income and family situations, and so you need a certain amount of, I guess, don't get too high during the high periods, don't get too low during the low periods. And I guess the other piece of just general advice is do something to make you happy on a daily basis. And do something to make somebody else happy on a daily basis. That's that small, that pinpoint of light, if you will. We also talked a little bit about this, but there's a well-known poem by the poet Robert Frost, and the actual poem is called "The Road Not Taken." It was written in 1915, so not exactly current, but it really is. The poem discusses a man who's walking in the wood, and there's a fork in the road, and he ultimately makes a decision to take the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Now, most people interpret that as being, okay, don't do what everybody else does, and that's one lesson you could draw from that. But that's probably not what Frost meant, because he was writing it because or inspired by a friend of his who couldn't make decisions to save his life, and when he finally did make the decision, it was like then he worried about whether it was the right decision or not. And what I would counsel people is to say that, again, and I said this I think earlier, is like, understand that in real time we all have to make decisions based on the best information available. Your own life experiences, common sense, intuition, those things, and they all have a consequence. Actions have consequences.
Yes.
And we sometimes those are not foreseeable, but you can't not make decisions. And I would say that's a part of that resiliency. It's like, understand that you need to make a decision, and that decision may be right, it may be wrong, it may be somewhere in between, but you just have to understand that no plan is perfect, and you need to adopt. And that's part of the business leadership thing too. I mean, I've worked with early stage companies, I've consulted with startups, I've been an angel investor in the tech field, and some of the things we always tell them is, when you create a business plan, understand you need to modify that. So you can't just write a 30-page business plan and use it for your deck to get money and then throw it in a drawer, never to be revisited again. I mean, life is about adjusting on the fly. So that's my advice. You got to adjust on the fly.
Thank you for listening to Legacy Leader Show. If you enjoyed the content and had a positive experience, then please leave us a positive rating. In addition, leave us a positive review whenever you are listening on whatever platform there might be. Make sure your friends and family also know about the benefit and value that we provide and what we have to offer. Cheers.